Okay, I think we're ready to go, Professor. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
Excellent. And Angela, you might want to take yourself off mic if you're yelling at
She's
traffic.
oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry for that brief interruption of myself, Professor. This is another weird world, isn't it? I mean, isn't this a weird week?
Every week is weird.
But
Depends
is it
where you
because of
where
national?
you
Is it because of national politics? Is history really about the presidency, or isn't history of a country or the world about 330 million Americans? Why is everyone apparently? I think you're talking about Trump, aren't you? In being a weird word, or is there something else going on that's weird?
well, I think that my fuller answer would be that every week can be weird depending on where you affix your gaze. I mean, if you're looking for weird, you'll find weird every week. But
Well, I've
every
got some
single
friends. If
day,
you're talking about my friends, I agree. But what are you talking about? And like
well, it's
besides
just,
president?
every now and then you got to put it into perspective that something like every day we now produce as much information as all of human history did for the first, whatever, tens of thousands of years. So
Ooh, that's actually, I looked it up before the show. When did the, radio come into, popular mode in America?
I mean, would be the 1920s.
Yeah, half the American homes had one radio in 1931. How about TV? When did
Became
most
universal, became virtually universal. And well, I mean, it was plurality in the 50s and virtually universal in the 60s.
yeah, 90% of homes had a one TV in 1960. So excellent. You know stuff off the top of your head. And there's other things, of recording and cameras, and there's all sorts of different ways to identify truth, or
But
whether
Jake,
it's
since our researcher just logged
yeah.
on, we can already give him a task because I know there's some mind-blowing stat that about how much knowledge is produced today versus all of human history. And Jake could look that up and put it in the chat, and it would blow our minds.
Well,
Uh,
why don't you, Jake, look that up and keep talking to the professor while I go grab my coffee mug. I sat down
oh,
without
okay.
my mug, so hold on. Keep talking.
Oh, well, we can't have a podcast without coffee mug. But the stat I'm looking for is, you know, what is, how much human knowledge is produced in a day or a minute or an hour compared to all of human history. Um, I don't know if it's
Okay, while
typing.
we're waiting for that, I've got my coffee.
All right, he's typing furiously. The amount of data in the world doubles every 2 years.
So, Professor, let's go ahead and I was going to do that later on in the conversation, but let's answer it now. How the hell are we? Hell's not a nice word, is it? How the heck are we supposed to understand history when there's so much of it now? 100 years ago, before radio was regular, it was limited information to the average human. But then it's rapidly evolved, and you're proving that by your stats. How the heck are we supposed to understand what the truth is in order to understand history?
Well, we have and tested to. I'm almost quoting my old professor David Harlan, Craig Harlan, who said we have tested and accredited means of figuring out what's important. He said historians are like hunting dogs. We always have our nose to the ground, but by relying on and his broader point was that beyond what he called mere professionalism, what will keep a historian honest and focused is working out of a sense of love and obligation to the past.
Well, I think
Because we
those are all
are,
wonderful things. Do average citizens care about that, though?
I think they should, and I think they're
Or do they,
capable
though?
of it, but I don't know if they do.
Okay.
But they should, and they're capable of it.
I love that they're capable of it. Okay, so I have some specific examples that I want to talk about today, but I really don't care about those specific examples. In fact, even though I titled the show History of Presidential Lies, I actually don't care about the presidential lies in campaigns and governance and in court as much as I do care about us as humans, as citizens. And I'm trying to see if I can get some history out of you to give us some perspective so we can be better citizens. That's my hidden agenda.
Well,
Is trying to figure out. Go ahead and respond to that.
I was just going to say we had a little I don't know, little footnote in the history of lying that took place at the Supreme Court this past week. So I was wondering if that was what prompted this, which is
Yeah, I don't think it was. Remind me, because maybe
oh,
it's
so in one of the oral arguments, probably the most experienced uh, advocate in front of the court accused another advocate who's maybe the number two most important advocate of lying. And Neil Gorsuch took her to task and walked her through and kind of made her take it back. And it was one of the spiciest moments that I've ever heard in a Supreme Court oral argument. So I kind of thought that was what was prompting your
it
discussion about
actually
lying.
it actually is not, but I'm intrigued because it's one of the reasons I wanted to include Bart is because there is a different type of lie, I believe. Uh,
Yeah,
and I
well, there are a lot of different ways of lying, and there are a lot of different ways of telling the truth. And we've talked about some of these things over the past. You know, for instance, we would say that when a leader, a political leader, is leaving out information um, in service to a larger truth, that can be part of statesmanship. And it's something that teachers do, you know, because we have to meet people where they are and in order to get them sort of where they need to be. And part of that involves, I don't know if it's so much a lie, but we often have to pretend that a student is a better version of themselves than they're presenting. And you know, in other words, they'll come at us with
pushing that out a little bit because I'm not sure I understand what
oh, you know, for instance, a student will be inappropriately rude in class, and you have to ignore the rudeness and then model the behavior you'd like to see in order to guide the conversation back into something that's more productive. And yeah, and as somebody just said in the chat, parents too, right?
and friends. We
Yeah,
have to
and
be that way
friends,
with
right?
friends.
It's part of, and that's why I think when Craig Harlan was talking about what should motivate historians, that like ultimately what will lead to more honest honesty and more productive honesty is when you're motivated by love and obligation. And what we call a lie is often very difficult to prove in history, meaning because, and Bart can probably weigh in on this as well, because I'm not a legal expert on this, but you know, when we're trying to assess whether somebody's telling a lie in the past, it's different than the legal definition of a lie, and even the law doesn't insist on beyond all doubt. The law says beyond a reasonable doubt, or sometimes in civil cases, a preponderance of the evidence. And then we just say it's a lie. But, you know, it's not that we're 100% certain it's a lie. It's a preponderance of the evidence that it's a lie, beyond a reasonable doubt that it's a lie. And then we just say, well, for the purposes of this event that we're saying right here, this is a lie. We have demonstrated that you intended, and I think, and I don't want to put words in Bart's mouth, but I think intention has to be demonstrated or proven in order to call something a lie. But Bart, you want to refine my
Let's not go to Bart
definition?
yet. Let's not go to
Well,
Bart yet.
I want to know.
All right.
You know, I like to hear. I want to hear from Bart. Bart.
Okay.
Okay, so you're what you're getting into here is kind of a heavily debated legal area. Okay. One of the things we've learned, I guess, over the last century is that the human memory is kind of very, very unreliable.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to show that people may not be telling the truth at one point or another. You know, and truth is kind of I don't want to say it's relative because everybody's going to go, oh, come on, it's not relative. Well, but the reality is, you know, how are you defining a lie? I guess
Yeah.
is what it comes down to.
Well, and I thought one of the key insights into memory and lying is this, and I've seen this happen in my own life several times, which is that I mean, I could believe that a certain thing about, what I said about the Ukrainian invasion or something like that. And that's based on a story I've told myself about how I felt or about how I feel. And but then if you say, well, no, you actually said, I don't know, some Ukraine can't win or something. And I would be like, no, I never said that. But then if you could present me with an old Toodle Talk episode that maybe has that, and I would just be like, I can't believe that I ever said that. I don't remember ever feeling that way. So and I was thinking about that. I was teaching stuff about Nixon this past week, and speaking of presidential lying, and I was reminded of when Billy Graham, it was revealed that he had said, anti-Semitic and embarrassing things on those White House tapes, and he didn't believe it. And even after he heard the tapes, you could almost hear it in his voice where he's like, I just can't believe I ever said that stuff, And if it weren't for the audio tape, I bet you could have hooked Billy Graham up to a lie detector test and said, have you ever said anything anti-Semitic? And he was saying, no, are you crazy? I never felt that way about Jews or something. But he didn't remember because in his memory, it just went down as I had a talk with the president, and I agreed with him on a lot of stuff, but you don't remember all the yes anding that you're doing as part of the conversation. It doesn't go in other words, he doesn't think of himself as an anti-Semite. So in his memory, if you would have hooked him up to a lie detector test, he would have said, no, I've never felt that way about Jews. And then you play the tape back and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that.
Well, I think that's all true on the human mind. And it's an interesting part of the conversation, but it's still getting me slightly off track.
Okay.
But your question to Bart was interesting. Bart, I think the professor said you have to have intent for it to be a lie. I'm reading in that like mens rea or the guilty mind, and it's important. And that's, I think, in a criminal setting, maybe a lie. I don't think you need intent to have a lie. I think you can be a liar without in good faith. You can be a good faith liar. Do you have a legal reaction to that specific narrow point, Bart?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on what the lie is involved in. And I know that's kind of like double speak and stuff, but the reality is there are statutes that require you to have intent to deceive somebody
Yeah.
with
Okay.
a lie.
Yeah.
But you're
There are a lot
absolutely
of
right.
there are a lot of ways of getting things wrong that don't involve lying.
Right.
The racists before the Civil War, they were absolutely sincere in what they believed, but they were wrong. Yeah, basing information on the stuff that conclusions on bad information.
Okay. Let's go back to this if necessary. Next
Okay.
question, Professor. This is so quaint of me. I feel naive in my own background that when President 41 Bush Sr. said, read my lips, and he looked in my eyes. I know he was probably looking in a bunch of people's eyes, but it was, out of the 315 million at the time, I thought he was talking to me. Read my lips. No new taxes. I really liked that language because it was direct, and I knew he wasn't lying, and I knew he would stick to his word when he said that. So I voted for him, and I would have voted for him anyway because I was Republican. But the bottom line is I voted for him proudly for that and a variety of other reasons until I voted against him the next time. The reason I voted against him is because he lied. Oh, I don't know if he lied, but he changed his mind and he increased our taxes. So I voted against President 41 the second time because of that. Now, isn't that silly and naive of me?
Yes, and I would say that wasn't a lie, and you were wrong to vote against him, and
Fair enough.
that he wasn't lying when he said it. And the other thing is, like, the new facts appear. Sometimes the situation changes, and he could have been saying, under the certain. I mean, you don't want to say, well, read my lips, no new taxes, and that would mean Yeah, if the situation stays the same,
You
we're
are
not going to
the
have any new taxes. But if the situation changes, of course there will be new
but
taxes.
you are the all-wise and knowing history professor with maturity and thoughtfulness. I am an anti-tax, lower federal government standard, so it to me, that was a big deal. Okay, now
Well,
last fall
but here's the other thing. Like, I would even defend. I mean, if you really like, I would even defend what he did as restructuring the tax code in a way over the next, so that over the next 8 years, um, that it altered the tax structure in a way that probably ended up in a lower overall tax burden throughout the 1990s, that also increased revenue and led to economic growth that put more money in your pocket. So if your objection is that you object to taxes because it's taking money out of your pocket, what Bush did put more money in your pocket over the next 8 years.
up. I love this conversation. Next major lie,
Yeah.
after Bush was what? Was it Clinton or did anyone else lie in between?
Oh, well, I mean,
I know you didn't accept the
yeah, I
first
mean, Clinton
lie,
lied.
but where do we get to major
I
lies?
mean, Clinton was somebody who I think you can say um, was extremely cynical in his use of non-truth. He was one of the first presidents, because one thing you can say about Clinton is that he wasn't stupid. So, for instance, this would be, in a way, it's kind of, I mean, maybe set us on this path of, now we get Trump. But for instance, his pollster was a real piece of work, Dick Morris, and he came to Clinton and he said, the American people don't understand numbers and scale. And if you go out and say we're going to hire 100,000 new teachers, and then say, well, I'm pro-education, Bill Clinton is smart enough to know what we're doing is not going to have any effect on education in America. And Dick Morris was like, so what? Just go out and say it, you know. Uh, and that'll help you. I mean, and I guess the larger truth he was saying is like, and it'll help you get reelected, and you're a good guy, and you're better than Bob Dole, so it'll help you win the election. And by the way, that worked so well, we're going to do the same thing and say we're going to hire 100,000 new policemen. And in both cases, he knew that what he was, in a larger sense, saying to the American people was a lie. Because he was implying somehow that 100,000 teachers and 100,000 policemen we're gonna do something. And in effect, what he proposed did nothing about. I mean, it didn't. It was, and he did it anyway.
So how
So,
many teachers are there in America, or how many cops? And when you're saying scale,
well, I
100,000.
just remember the one about cops because my dad happened to be working at the city at the time, and what they were actually proposing was that the federal government would partially fund positions at cities for a specified amount of time. That's why it wouldn't cost very much money. So, for instance, in my city, which at the time I think had about a population of 90, 100,000 people at the time, what they were proposing, I mean, just think about it, like in a city of 90 or 100,000 people, if you were to partially fund one position for a year and a half or 2 years, is that going to change crime in your city? Like, no, it's not going to do anything. And for the city, they were like, well, do we want to take on the long-term obligation of this salary? Do we want to be paying for his health care and for his pension, and all of the associated costs that go with hiring a permanent employee? And so the city has to be responsible, and decide whether or not this is good federal money to take or bad federal money to take. But it's certainly not going to, do anything for crime, But is that a lie? Well, you can certainly call it dissembling, and if we're being blunt, I guess we would call it a lie because he knew that what he was doing was at the time. But sometimes we call that, when it comes to politicians, we call it puffery, and we kind of expect it during you know, from politicians because we expect for them to present the best version of themselves because they have to run for office. So, you know,
And lawyers can do that in opening closing statements as
yeah.
well.
So again, I don't think it's impeachable, but it's one of those things that make you go, I don't think it's improving civic life.
Oh, I love that answer. Remember that as one of our conclusions, Professor. So we accept lying in campaigns from the president and every other elected official. It's kind of par for the course. Is
Well, I would just say we should expect exaggeration, and usually this is guided by someone's own sense of shame. So what I think is a more important trait in a politician, what I like and what I look for is someone who is capable of being shamed, someone who would be ashamed of themselves, who couldn't sleep at night when their head hit the pillow because of what they had done, but because they're going to be the kinds of people who won't engage in that kind of behavior.
All right. So another conclusion: you're just beside yourself with the current administration, then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the caveat that I try to remember that Trump is stupid, or I mean, presents himself, and I don't think he is troubled by this. I think that he probably believes most of what he says, but there are probably also quite a few deliberate lies in there as well. But so, in other words, like there's some mix. Some future historian is going to have to figure out like how much of this was lies and how much was stupid.
Well, but as far as the shame part, though, is what I was referring to.
Yeah, he's completely shameless. As far as we know, nothing has ever made him ashamed.
Yeah, it's just like the prototype of being shameless.
Yeah, he is a guest on the Jerry Springer show.
Okay, fair enough. I do want to go way back in history now, not like who invented lying. That was going to be one of my silly questions to you. But I do want to go. I couldn't see what Hope wrote on the notes, but it was about Lincoln being a great or a first liar or a good liar. Can you give a little bit of that? Because I watched the movie Lincoln, and it was wonderful about what he had to do to get the votes through Congress. And was Lincoln a liar?
No, and I think it's a good example of the difference between sophistry and statesmanship. We should probably get Joseph from, here's another name to put down, which is because he's a wild man and he's a really fun guy, Joseph Forneri. He wrote a book on Lincoln statesmanship, and I'm really stealing from him when I talk about the difference between sophistry and statesmanship. And he is a wild man, super fun guy.
Wait, he's a professor?
Yeah, he's a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology, I think.
And he was able to get tenure?
Yeah. Well, he got tenure a long time ago, so.
Then he became wild. Okay.
And like all conservatives, he just remained closeted. I don't actually know if he's a conservative or not. I don't know what his politics are. But someone like that, he has to remain closeted in order to
Fair
get
enough.
tenure.
About Lincoln? What? Say it again.
What's that?
About Lincoln.
So Lincoln was not a liar. He was somebody who was very skillful in leaving things out that were harmful to the national debate and trying to find a way of meeting people where they were in order to get them to take the next step. Now, that I would say is also something that's different from him. As a young man, Lincoln did engage in lying and cheating and weirdness especially when he was younger. One of the cooler thing, I shouldn't say cooler, it's kind of like depressing to know, but like Lincoln wrote a lot of anonymous letters to newspapers when he was a young politician.
Where just like Trump. Yikes.
Yeah, no, it was, but because of linguistic analysis, we've been able to figure out that these anonymous letters were actually written by Lincoln, and where he would accuse politicians of being feminine or soft or lying or, just every horrible insult you can think of. And they were submitted anonymously to newspapers. And we're pretty sure that Lincoln wrote those.
That's
So he
that's
did.
fantastic. I hate that kind of politics. Why are you smiling, or why
Well,
are
I'm a historian. I have to tell you the truth, whether whether I like it or not. Like it's one of those things where when you're picking up the book and you read it and you go, well, I guess I have to incorporate this into what I know about Lincoln now. He was a very human, young, ambitious politician who would get angry, but he sort of knew enough that he knew it wasn't the version of himself that he wanted to present to the world. So he wrote scandalous anonymous letters to newspapers.
fascinating? Did you see Hope's last comment? I think you were saying the same thing in different ways about not telling the full truth about abolition.
Yeah.
Uh, in the
So
right.
he didn't want people to know he was pro-abolition until after the election, right? But in a way, what he was doing was leading people. And I also don't necessarily think he was lying, because he really did believe that in his letter to Horace Greeley, um, what he said was, I have a personal belief that has been oft expressed that all men everywhere should be free. But I have an official duty as president of the United States to adhere to the laws of the United States of America. And that just means that, like, I can wish that, I could wish that people in Venezuela are free, but I don't have an official role in the government of Venezuela. Like I can have this official, but what I can do, and there are probably a lot of things that to make it sort of personal, I guess I'd say, like, there are a lot of things that I would say that, as a Presbyterian, that I would want for my students, but I can't do those things because it's not my job. I also, part of my personal code of ethics is that, even though, Jesus would like for me to evangelize everywhere I go, I have agreed, to teach history in exchange for money. And when I'm doing that, it would not be appropriate. Now, I won't lie about it if asked directly, but I also don't, it's not what I lead with every single day, and it's not painted on my forehead. So uh, Lincoln, as president of the United States, would say, I swore an oath of office as president of the United States to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And what he believed was the legal, I think, we should have one of the better experts than me, but I would say that what Lincoln believed is that, and this was the evolved legal theory of the North, basically, was that when the Constitution was ratified, it did not sanction slavery as a national institution, but slavery in American law was an institution within the states that he currently had no power to interfere with. And it wasn't until the rebellion broke out that he had the legal authority to interfere with slavery within the states. So when he was telling people, and in that letter to Horace Greeley, he's, you can see he's almost a little bit angry, because he says, like, as to the course I seem to be pursuing, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. He says, I would save the Union, and I would save it in the shortest way under the Constitution. Then he says a bunch of other stuff. And then he says, like, but I intend no modification of my oft expressed belief. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact quote, that all men everywhere should be free.
Yeah, no, your memory is really good at these things. It's surprisingly good. Uh, so, Professor, I don't know how to get to my main three thrusts of this conversation with this in-depth part. So I just need to throw it out there.
Okay.
Campaigning. We accept that exaggerations are not the full truth or the best presentation of yourself, and maybe even some lies, as long as it's our side making the other side look bad. Most citizens apparently seem to be tolerant of lies during campaigns, if not even supportive of lies during
Yeah,
campaigns.
I was going to say it's even, I would go further than that and say that if it's from your own side, you won't even see it.
Yeah,
Uh,
you like
yeah,
it. It's
you won't even recognize it. I mean,
a rallying
the
cry and
the
hooray.
example that Hope put into the chat is a great example of like, um, President Obama probably believed in gay marriage, and he was lying when he said that he didn't. I mean, or maybe he just evolved overnight. I don't know, but
Right.
some historian 50 years from now will make the judgment on that. But
Ooh, I
I
got to remember
think
that. Remember
it's
this point.
safe to say that Obama is probably lying about that.
Because I need to get to the evidentiary fact base, how historians and how lawyers figure out what the truth is. That's one of my thrusts of of this conversation. So campaigns, we're on the same page. How about elected officials once they're in office? Are lies tolerable? Is that something we want for our constitutional republic? Is that and we don't have to even go to religion and morality. I mean, because that's one answer. But I mean, as far as our system goes, do we tolerate elected officials lying to us?
We tolerate, and the system is made for, let's call it a baggy interpretation of the truth, but it's not really made for people who are um, liars. So that's why I sort of put Trump in a different category along with Aaron Burr. I remember when Trump first came around, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's Aaron Burr, which is,
Explain.
I just mean somebody who is completely shameless. Um, I mean, say what you will about Richard Nixon, but he didn't want to lie. His lip would sweat. He felt bad about it. He would get defensive, and that means that there's some sort of moral code that is at work there. Whereas, sometimes, and this is kind of one of the scarier things about Clinton, is because he had shades of this, but the ability to just sort of look you in the eye and lie without the attempt to dissemble or prevaricate, like it's almost scary. I mean, I encounter this a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but a couple times a year with students. And each time I'm like, you're actually scaring me a little.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of humans do that to each other in personal relationships, and when we see it, it's yikes. When you can just tell. Uh,
Yeah.
so you have a pretty strong feeling on the presidency. Talk to me about appointed officials. And it's a more pointed issue now since we're probably expanding it from a couple thousand appointed officials to potentially 50,000 or 75,000, depending on how the president's going to reassign a bunch of federal employees to have them at will employees for the presidency. Is it okay for taxpayer funded employees to lie to us?
I guess it depends on what they're lying about, because I think I'll give you an example of how public employees lie all the time. Um, a lot of lying has to do with meaningless compliance. And we tell ourselves, well, this is okay. This is like, I don't care. The person who's asking me doesn't care. No one cares about this. It's essentially an acknowledged lie from the moment the meeting is called. That no one in this room cares about this, that we just have to pretend and we're all going to join in this like group lie and
You're
do.
talking like procedural open record meeting checks or something, or what are you referring to?
Oh, I'll give you a concrete example. For instance, like, and this is going to be super boring and technical for everybody to hear, but so our for an online class to go through accreditation, there's like a checklist of things to establish what's called regular and substantive interaction. And um, just because I'm a little bit pedantic and I wanted to get it off my plate, I just made a Word document that went through the what counts under the law as regular and substantive interaction, and I just put it up on in my class and said, if some accreditor wants to look at it, here it is. But the school said, no, what we want is we want you to use this particular form and do the same thing. And like, that administrator can look at it and they know that they're lying when they say you have to use this module. That's a lie.
Right.
And I'm participating in the lie when I enthusiastically say, absolutely, boss, you got it, and we're all just lying to each. And it's also a lie that any of that will improve education. Right. It's a lie that it will have any effect. And everyone knows that this is just empty, meaningless compliance that has no effect on student learning or anything that would improve the institution. So it's just a big, gigantic fraud, which you could call a lie, that we're all just, and we're all getting paid to do it. You look at the salaries of the people in that room and you're like, I'm looking at, $1 million in annual salary, and we're spending 2 hours doing this out of our work year, and that's taxpayer money. So again, it's a narrow, but it's just the most recent example I can think of.
Sure, and there would clearly be national security secrets, military secrets that we have to lie about. By definition, to even get the job, you're going to lie. You can't just tell.
Yeah.
There's confidential and private information. There's all sorts of stuff that you would lie about because it's your job to lie about. It's none of
that stuff's fine. We accept that.
But a normal government employee should generally tell the truth to media, or no, it doesn't matter.
Yes. I think that everybody has an obligation to be basically truthful in all circumstances. But we tolerate enough to sort of grease the gears so that to make sure that life doesn't come to a screeching halt.
Fair enough. I've got to switch to Bart though to get a legal nuance if there is any, and then we're going to open up to questions. So Bart, you've heard about politics and campaigns. You've heard about governance. We have some specific examples from Lincoln and Burr to Clinton and Bush and Trump. But from a legal perspective, can you give us are there any nuances that are different between campaigning and governing in a courtroom?
I can give you some more historical campaign lies if you'd like.
While we're waiting for Bart.
Bart, he might have stepped away. But I was just thinking of the campaign of 1828, not to throw some more history in here, but one of my favorite campaign lies was that the Democrats accused John Quincy Adams of being a pimp for the Russian Tsar, which is just the most absurd thing ever. But here's one that was actually based on because John Quincy Adams is such a good guy that you couldn't find anything, that he'd ever actually done that was scandalous. But they said that when, as president, he had brought into the White House, he had defiled the White House by bringing in gaming tables and gambling furniture. But it was because he owned a chess set.
A chess set? Really?
He defiled the White House with gaming tables and gambling furniture. Can't a guy own a chess set? Or, Democrats jumping on Mitt Romney for the binders full of women thing. When George Bush was campaigning in, I think, 92, and they made it seem like Bush was out of touch for not understanding how supermarket scanners worked,
Yeah.
when really what was happening is he was just trying to be polite to some people at a demonstration of some supermarket scanners, like they're all, and we don't say that we need to throw those people in jail. That's part of the rough and tumble of campaigning. Um,
So those are good examples of campaign. While we're waiting for Bart, make sure you yell at me when you come
Well,
back on.
here's a big, how about this one? I'll give you one of the ones that has like maybe the biggest policy implications, is that 2/3 of what our government does as of right now is entitlement spending.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. So in terms of altering the course of American history and what the American government does, that is an overwhelming and inescapable fact. And the reason why Social Security was funded as payroll taxes was essentially a lie that Franklin Roosevelt knew was a lie. He said at the time that the Social Security taxes were being implemented. People pointed out to him, this doesn't make any sense. You're making these things like it's a payroll deduction, and people are going to think that they're getting their own money back. And that's not true. And if you poll people today in the year 2025, that's still how people feel about Social Security. And FDR said in the meeting, I suppose you're right, but those taxes are politics through and through. With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program. Because the American people will feel like they have a moral claim on that money, because they'll think it's theirs.
It's probably a super majority opinion that agree with that statement.
Yeah. And the reason they feel that way, and the reason why, I mean, old people will go nuts if they see that because there are people who will be like, stop calling it an entitlement, it's my money. And you're like, first of all, that's what an entitlement is. That's just what the word means. I don't even know what we're arguing about here. But second of all, you're not getting your own money back. And people will have these theories of like, well, it was Nixon who got rid of the whatever, or it's like, no, it's it's a line on a ledger. It's no, but people actually think that their money was like being put in a separate safe that would then be sort of like given back to them. So I don't know. You could say that the majority of how about this as a headline? The majority of what the federal government does in the year 2025 is based on a lie. That started from a lie from FDR, I don't know. If we're trying to be controversial, I guess state it that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, I concur with that. So Bart, let me know when you're back on. Professor, let me switch from campaigns to governance. Did you watch a portion of the interview with the guy who I've never heard of, but I assume he's a nice guy. But the reason I selected him was the president selected him as he'd never heard of him. Did you see that interview this week?
No.
I forget the guy's name myself, but he's a famous.
This is going to be a really compelling conversation.
I know, but he is influential and famous. I just don't know his name. Neither does the president. It was about the MS-13 on the Knuckles. Did you see that part at all?
No.
Oh, you got to watch it. It's like 5 minutes long. It's fascinating.
Okay.
But President Trump swears that.
I did hear about this. He believes that this guy had a tattoo that said MS-13, and the reason he believes it was because of some Photoshop thing that somebody showed him.
Yeah, and it's just a photograph with MS-13 over the symbols. And it was a fascinating conversation because all my friends, at least on the liberal side, conservatives just haven't talked about it, but all the liberal friends just think he's either an idiot or a liar, or both. But my question to you, though, is there is some truth to what Trump said that very few people are talking about. And that's the four symbols that are on there: a marijuana leaf, M, a smiley face, S, a cross that looks like a one. And then the last one is a skull that is the third letter in the Spanish alphabet, which is and it kind of it could be a three. It sure could be MS-13, and some of the experts say it is an MS-13 code tattoo. My point to you is the whole nation stopped over this interview and just thought the president was an idiot because he can't determine a Photoshop MS-13 versus a picture with MS-13. My point is, I don't know if it matters at all. If you're scared of gangs, good enough. You're with Trump. If you don't want immigrants, you're with Trump. If you're compassionate towards people coming to America, you're against Trump. I don't know if the facts matter at all, and that's what
Well, I had this happen yesterday with two incidents that happened simultaneously in my real life. It's also a good example because there are two things that I was wrong about. But so my son showed me a clip of Family Guy that had cursing, and I was like, Family Guy, that's on TV. How could they show cursing? And I was like, oh. And he was like, no, there's cursing. I was like, okay. And then I was on the phone with my sister at the time, and she was asking me about a news story that seemed outrageous. And what I was trying to simultaneously say to both my son and my sister is like, because I mean, in their own soft way, although Otis, my son, was more like, fully disagreeing, but in both cases, I was like, it's not that I don't believe you. It's that I'm not believing this until I check it out for myself. And in both cases, I was wrong. That the clip my son was showing me was not edited. It was real. I didn't know that they allowed cursing on the streaming services of Family Guy. And the story that my sister was showing me turned out to be legitimate. The California state legislature is insane. And I should always know that whatever, like even something that seems like it's made up, you just almost can't make up the stuff that they do. So much so that the issue was like the governor was like, this is crazy Governor Newsom was like, this is crazy. So anyway, in both cases, I wasn't saying no, you're wrong. I was just saying, I'm just not going to incorporate this into my belief system until I check it out. And I was doing it about stuff that does not matter.
right.
Whether or not they allow cursing on Family Guy is a fairly minor issue. If I was the president and I was making policy, I would take a minute and just be like, is this legitimate? Is this real? And I would probably want to surround myself with people who are dedicated to telling me the truth rather than what I want to hear, because I would actually care if what I was basing policy decisions on was real, and this is a habit of mind. And not to just make this all about Trump as it is almost every week, but he does not have that. I think it's fair to say he does not have that habit of mind. He does not want to be surrounded by people who are dedicated to the truth, and he does not want to be. He probably doesn't care one way or the other.
And actually, I don't particularly care about that. Although I think it is important to have a president that does what you're advocating. I care more that upwards of a majority of our citizenry don't seem to care about that. They don't care. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but that's part of our what's that?
Isn't that more concerning, though, that our culture has become one where we don't judge veracity of information or facts?
Yeah. And I had a long conversation with an old friend about this just yesterday, that politics is downstream of culture, and what we're seeing in our politics is something that is a problem with our culture, and it's something that's a problem with our educational system, because you have to teach people to value things that seem to be against their immediate interests. because it's in our long-term best interest to be dedicated to truth, but it's often not in our short-term best interest to be.
Lovely. Sounds like an old William Bennett book, but maybe.
Maybe, yeah, he's probably said. I mean, that's not just an old. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing Hamilton and Madison. Like it's not like I invented this concept. It's all through the Federalist I know we always quote Federalist 1, but reflection and choice are things that have to be taught. To take things out of the realm of immediate desire, and then put those political issues into a process in order to force reflection and choice instead of giving in to accident, force, or desire.
That's nice. I love how you keep going back to Federalist 1. Professor, superficial again. Does it matter that we don't have Veterans Day anymore? News
I
of
think so. Yeah. I think all that stuff matters. I think Yuval Levin has pointed out, I think, one really big important idea, and that is that we no longer seek out character shaping institutions. And instead, when something tries to shape our character, we almost rebel against it, as because we want our prejudices to be encouraged and flattered. And every one of these social practices has a cumulative effect. I just got my jury summons over here, and I know that I'm not going to end up serving on a jury because I've never actually served on a jury, like I always get dismissed. But I sometimes tell my kids, like, showing up for jury duty is easier than getting my face slashed by a Japanese bayonet before my 19th birthday, which is what my grandpa had to do. So if this is what is required of me as part of my civic duty, I don't just do it begrudgingly. I should really do it out of gratitude, and say, if this is what it takes in order to make the system work, like, of course I'm willing to do this. Now, the part of me that resents it is the part of me that knows that they're going to boot me anyway. So now I know I've been booted so many times that I know that I'm never going to serve on a jury. So now I see it as a waste of time. But again, hopefully we do this stuff out of a sense of gratitude. Maybe it does all just come back to love and obligation.
Yeah, that's good. I have other questions, and I still want Bart, but apparently he is practicing law or something. Let's go
I'm
to
back
question.
now.
He's back. Bart's
I'm
back.
back now. Sorry.
Okay, Bart, you missed my whole grand preface. The preface is this, and try to do it in just 2 minutes less. We'll get to Q&A from the audience if there is any. We've talked about lies in campaigns that we tolerate and expect. We talk about lies in governance, both with elected officials down to appointed officials, and the nuances of why they lie and why it's okay and why it's probably not great anyway, morality wise and culturally wise. We've talked, and now I want to know legally though, and I have a specific reason in court. That if we really want to know what the truth is on many of these debates of the day, we actually are dependent on the courts, Article 3 of the Constitution. And there's specific reasons why the courts are better at this than citizens and voters and media and elected officials and appointed officials. And can you explain a little bit about lies in the law, specifically in filings in courts? Can you just give us a history lesson on the law?
Yeah.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes or less. The reason courts are a good place for all of this is that you have due process. You get to present what you're saying is true, and you have to put witnesses on, and you have to show evidence of what that is. The other side gets to cross-examine you about what you're saying, to, in other words, test what you're saying. And then the other side also gets to put on their version of supposedly what is the truth. And you get to cross-examine that. And that process does get you most of the time to the right result. There are times when it doesn't, nothing's perfect. But I think that, in courts, you have due process.
Can a lawyer lie in their writings to the court?
No, they're not supposed to. However, I have encountered attorneys who do.
But is there a ramification for an attorney that lies in writing to a court?
Absolutely.
Like
absolutely. A judge can hold you in contempt of court. You're also violating the attorney's rules of ethics in like all 50 states, to do that, because you have to sign off on pleadings that you do believe that what is being said here is correct, to your best knowledge.
You could actually lose your job as well. You could be prohibited
absolutely.
from practicing your career.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I think that's why the conversation earlier, where you and Stephen were talking, and you were talking about the back and forth between one of the U.S. Supreme Court justices the other day,
Lisa Blatt and Gorsuch.
Yeah, and Justice Gorsuch. I think that's why Justice Gorsuch jumped in there, because I know from listening a lot to Sarah Isker and David French that, Lisa Blatt is one of the leading, Supreme Court advocates. She also prides herself apparently on using very plain language to make her arguments. Well, I think the reason Justice Gorsuch grabbed onto that was because, Lisa Blatt did use very openly the word, well, he's lying. Well, the person lying is somebody that the Supreme Court has depended on about as often as Lisa Blatt not to be lying.
Yeah.
And I think Justice Gorsuch knew that, they had the other side's position in the case had evolved, but he wasn't lying, and I think he was right to do that. And I think it's good he did.
And advocates have to have the ability to advocate. You need a little bit of play in the joints so that you can, give in order to be able to advocate for your client.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Agreed. But also those advocates also have a sworn loyalty, dual loyalty. They have a loyalty to their client, but they also have a loyalty to the court. They are an officer of the court, no matter what perspective they're advocating. They're still an officer of the court, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's not true in campaign politics or governance. It's only true in courts.
Right.
Well, but hopefully we all have a conscience, right? That's why, if I'm going to, defend, conservatism classic, things that conservatives used to say, like politics is downstream of culture. Here's another one, which is character is destiny, which is that you can't really escape someone who is a bad character. Like it's something you don't want it to have to fix in on-the-job training. I'm going to hire someone of bad character and then try to fix them. Like, let's just hire someone who's of good character. Everyone's on a journey. I'm not saying slap these people in leg irons or something, but we don't actually have to hire a bad person for this job. We can actually hire somebody who's good, or not hire anybody in the case of like most jobs.
I love that point. So people have a triple loyalty to morality or spirituality or good common sense and good decency, to their job, the Constitution in this setting, and also in a legal setting. And one additional thing of being loyal to the truth, or liberty and justice for all.
And our fact checker's been so on the spot that I want to be fact checked in real time on this one. I thought I saw the strangest headline from The Atlantic where they were saying there's this new idea called pluralism, and I just was like, God, I was like, what? But the fact that we live in a pluralist government is, and one of the amazing things about our system of government, it's based on how people actually are, which means that every one of us is more complex than a bundle of sticks, even, meaning that right now I am still a father to my sons. I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a homeowner, I'm many things. And the world gets to encounter the many me's in all of in you know, I got gas, you know, I'm the person who waits for the person to go instead of drives around them, you know, like there are many versions of me that the public encounters at any given moment, and some of that stuff is going to be based on, like, I don't know, my blood sugar level. You know, it's infinitely complex, how a human being decides to stumble through their own lives. And what we have to have is some sort of political system, pluralism, that accounts for how people actually are. We're infinitely complicated, and there is no solution that will create something perfect as a result. And in fact, when you try to create something perfect, that's when you end up with mass murder. All the great mass murders in human history have come from trying to bring about heaven on earth. And what I love and what is frustrating about the law, as Bart was describing this legal process, I was thinking about, is there anything else that's more tested than the legal system every single day as a process? I mean, every single day, this system is tested again and refined again. And it's refined through tens of thousands of people who are all, and you might say, well, there should be a better way. It's like, well, I don't know. We're running this experiment every single day and making it slightly better every day. Like, and it manages to produce probably the best result that human beings could come up with. You know, anything short of a god couldn't come up with something better. And we know this because it's being tested every single day with smart, not just smart people, dumb people, advocates, victims, you know, criminals, like rich people, poor people are testing this every single day. It's actually kind of amazing. And our political system is this maybe a little bit behind, and I shouldn't say behind, but like less tested in a sense. But I don't know, every single day our government's functioning. Maybe we should be a little bit more positive about what the founders created. It's actually a miracle, you know, that
it works.
Yeah, that it works and keeps getting mostly better. I mean, certainly we have some, you know, not everything gets better all the time, but it's actually amazing how often it works.
So I guess I have one more, and then we'll get to Jeff and Angela if you have questions. So prepare yourself, Jeff and Angela, and Jake, if you're still with us. Professor, there is a significant movement that has, it's only tangentially related to Trump. He's like the outcome of it. He's not the cause of it. And that's that maybe our system doesn't work, and we're fighting communist Russia and communist China, and those authoritarian economies sometimes are more efficient than this mass of lawsuits and product liabilities and rules and regulations of who you can hire, and you know, just the morass of the American system. And there's a movement away from pluralism and away from free market to no, we got to compete, and our country could be at risk unless we take strong, decisive, bold, authoritarian action. There's a real movement.
That is as evil and wrong when somebody says that about, you know, competition with China and Russia today, as it was evil and wrong when people said, well, we need to do this because of global climate change. You know, and I guess I find it frustrating that like Tom Friedman has probably written a million different columns on how evil Trump is, but he's also the guy who wrote a column saying we need to have a dictator for a day in order to fix climate change, and you're just like, why? It's not hypocrisy. He literally doesn't see that he's advocating for the same thing. And this gets back to our issue of like, he's not lying. He just doesn't see it when he's the one making the argument that there's some problem that's so large that we need to destroy the American system of government.
Okay. I'm willing to end it at that and go to questions. Angela, you've joined us, I think, before, but if you're not driving and if it's safe, I'd like you to jump in. Take yourself off the mic or mute if you're ready. If you're not, or I'm going to go to Jeff. All right, Jeff, you're up.
Okay.
I don't know that I have any questions. I echo what Bart said about the wisdom of the legal system, the duty of candor, and the adversarial system as producing a mostly good result. I did take exception when we were talking about the standards by which you have to prove something as being intentional lies. I think they are measuring tools to see whether someone's advocacy has been adequate, but that brings back in the candor. You're not allowed to proffer witness testimony that you know will be a lie without, if you're caught, suffering consequences from either the court or the bar association. An interesting side note on that, I've read that there's now at least one person who's placed a complaint in the Florida Bar Association against Pam Bondi. And it has just been unbelievable to me that the willingness of DOJ attorneys to say things that can't possibly be true and are provably false, and they say them to courts. And so far, nobody's holding them accountable.
And so Jeff and Bart and Professor, isn't it true that the Attorney General is a taxpayer-funded organization, legal organization, who represents the citizens of the United States? Or is the Attorney General just a political appointee that represents the will of the president?
No, that's the White House counsel. The Attorney General doesn't represent the citizens, it represents the body, the United States of America.
Corporate body politic, yes.
Right.
How is that in the Constitution? Is that your opinion? What's your proof?
No, Bart's gonna have to answer that one. I don't think it's in the Constitution. I'm sure there's federal statutes, the USC code that says what the Attorney General does, but I'm confident, it's not my opinion. I'm confident that the Attorney General
we're all
is not
nodding,
the
by the
president's
way.
attorney.
We're all agreeing. He's not. He or she is not the president's counsel, and shouldn't be doing political stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that was always an understanding, if you will, that the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, the FBI needed to not be political. It needed to just focus on justice. But because the Attorney General and the deputies are political appointees, presidents, as they have grabbed more and more power over the last couple decades, have decided that the Attorney General needs to do what the president's agendas are, regardless of whether that's in the best interest of the United States.
And the kind of backdoor to this was to my mind, the non-prosecution. That when there were laws that the president didn't like, he would simply not enforce them. And Obama's non-enforcement of marijuana law, for instance, non-enforcement of the Defense of Marriage Act in some ways, and again, I'm probably mildly pro legalization, and I'm definitely pro gay marriage and always have been, but I always thought this is a problem because essentially we have states that are nullifying federal law in a way that is troubling. And the state attorney general and the Obama administration was ignoring it. And essentially, you took that, and Donald Trump just drove a. You took that crack, and then Donald Trump just drove a semi through it, and said, "Oh, well, if I can do this through non-prosecution, then I can prosecute my enemies to the maximum extent of absurdity, make them all defend themselves in court and get tied up in lawsuits. And then for my friends, just choose to say that I'm not prosecuting this case because, resources are limited."
Right.
And it is de facto politicization of the justice system.
And it's amazing how forgiving his supporters are of just the blatant use of partisan, going after enemies.
Yeah, and that's again,
It's
how I mean, America. This is what makes Americans cynical in real time, right? It's literally it's the same people who were defending Obama, excusing Trump, and then they just switch. Defend Biden for doing the same thing that Trump was doing, but more of Trump first term. And now all of the people who had huge problems with what Biden was doing now have no problem at all with what Trump is doing. And
the so-called weaponization of government. Yeah. It did dawn on me, though. We were talking about, Trump supporters not caring about when he tells a mistruth or doesn't understand something. As I listen, I'm just fascinated by the people who continue to support him. I understand the voters who voted for him and then were sort of let down. But I'm always listening to those interviews, people who are still supportive in it. I don't think they just don't care. I think for them, it's a bargain. It's a trade-off. I'm going to get what I want, which is probably an immigration related issue, and I'll overlook any of the problems that come with it. So I support him because I'm getting what I want, even if it comes with a price I don't like.
I think that there are fewer people who are that cynical. I think for most people, it's simple confirmation bias, because the thing that we want more than anything else is we want to be right about ourselves. And I think for the most part, people just don't see it because they have to tell themselves a story that's I'm a good person and I supported Trump. Therefore, I can't be wrong.
I don't want to admit I was wrong. Yeah. That's a good point.
And so I'm going to tie myself in knots so that I won't be wrong about myself.
Okay, I need to interrupt us with to get to Angela, because Angela, I bet you're madder than hell and you're not going to take it anymore. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, tell us what you're thinking about any part of this conversation.
I'll tell you what I think. This question about truth has been really fascinating for me for a really long time, because my mom was an alcoholic and she lied all the time. And it was part of the shame. That's what alcoholics do, is that they just lie. But as a result of her constantly not adhering to a truth, it altered our reality as children in that household. And so one of the things that I decided really early on is I am not going to tell a lie, not even a small lie, not even a convenient lie, not even a lie, that makes somebody feel more comfortable. I'm just not going to do that. And so what matters to me is less about, is it a truth or is it a lie? When I was a freshman in college and I was studying zoology and they had all the phylums and classifications, I thought, how interesting that there were people that reached consensus that this is how we were going to organize this kind of information. but it's not the only way. And religion speaks to that. We have lots of variations of truth depending on who you speak to. So that question of, is it truth or is it a lie is less interesting to me at this point in my life. Because what I have come to understand is that there are liars and there are truth tellers. And the thing that I find most disturbing is that we had 4 years of Trump, and there is general consensus that he's a liar and that he lacks character. And yet, there was a third of the population that said, I'm okay with that. And that idea of shaping our reality that is not its closest version of a truth, but more the closest version of entertainment. We choose that option instead of this option of love and obligation. Let's say that, rather than choosing character, we would rather be entertained by this clown and motivated by these divisions. And that to me is the disturbing part of all of this. So I'll just end it there.
Well, so that's interesting commentary, reaction to the commentary, and then I want to see if you have a question for the professor.
Every now and then I feel like I need to defend the Trump voter, even though I didn't vote for President Trump, but I do know that for many normal people who aren't engaged in the day-to-day of politics, they weren't choosing between a truth teller and a liar. They were choosing between two liars. And that's how they would put it. And yes, about a third of America don't care enough to even get to that point. But this election was not decided by Trump supporters or Harris supporters. It was decided by people who thought they were choosing between two liars. And they were making a guess as to which version might appear of these two people over the next 4 years. And so I'm just not willing to condemn the Trump voter quite as much and draw that conclusion about everyone who voted for Trump. I think you're right about a third of them, but I think a lot more people were in the category of if I'm believing the best version of Harris and I'm believing the best version of Trump, I think they're both liars. Which of these two liars in their best version do I think will appear over the next 4 years? And they came to a different conclusion than me, but I'm not willing to,
follow up reaction,
cast them
Angela.
into a pit.
Question for the professor.
Yeah, it's so like when you look at Trump in his personal life and the people that he lies to, like his wife, like I'm gonna enter into this marriage and then I'm gonna have affairs and cheat on every one of them. Like if you're lying to the most important people in your life, then you have no character. The difference in, political stump speeches and how you frame the language, that's not the same as these relationships that you have with these people that are your trusted confidants, and you're lying to those people. So if we're going to look at like who's the bigger liar, for me, there's no question. But again, I'm not interested in that conversation of who's the bigger liar. What I'm interested in is the fact that I'm somebody who believes in democracy and I believe in government. And when we continue to go down these paths of both of them are liars, what we fundamentally do is undermine this construct of a democracy. And that's what makes way to dictatorship and tyranny. And that I'm just seeing this erosion, and I'm not just saying from Republicans, and I'm not blaming it's the right or the left. I'm saying that collectively we've made a mockery out of our political system. And that as we continue to undermine, those foundational pieces around character and truth and credibility and integrity, and keeping your promises, all of that is part of that, then what we're left with is, I don't know. I mean, other countries have examples of that. So it's not like we don't know what's possible. We do. We know what, fascism looks like. We know what tyranny looks like. And so I wish that, and I can be in this utopian view, that Republicans and Democrats would just simply demand character from their representatives, and continue then to create the conditions where good character is not met with such, vile behavior from citizens who make this a blood sport, make politics a blood sport. Nobody wants to run, and particularly, I feel like people that do have character are less and less wanting to be in these environments that, are then reduced to who's the bigger liar. That's who wants to participate in that. No one.
Professor.
Yeah, I mean, that's all good stuff, I guess. I don't have a smart reaction to it, except for to say, Jake, I've got one more thing I want you to look up, which is this what to do next. As she was speaking, I was thinking about this Solzhenitsyn quote about let the lie come into this world, but not through me. And then I guess I'd be interested in hearing from Jake, because I know because people always say, like, well, what am I supposed to do in this world of this swimming world of lies? And many people use this quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn of like, well, let the lie come into, you can resolve to live your life with integrity. Let your credo be this: let the lie come into this world, let it even triumph, but not through me. And as far as your personal credo, like, I think that's pretty good. It helps you get through the day. I actually prefer the one from James Weldon Johnson as my personal credo, but that's a good one when it comes to dealing with lies.
Say it again, because you got it pretty well from memory. Say it again.
Oh, which one? The one from James Weldon Johnson? Oh, my inner life is mine, and I shall defend it and maintain its integrity against all the powers of hell. That's that. I like that one from James Weldon Johnson, but I like this one from Solzhenitsyn as well. So Jake, oh, go ahead.
Somebody else was jumping in, and we only have 4 minutes left. So jump in, whoever.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from Jake before we sign off, and also thank him. He did an amazing job today. Those of you who are on the live chat, or there's so many things that I made reference to, and man, they were just popping up in the chat like instantly.
Jake, jump in if you want, or a thumbs down if you're okay. Jump in.
I like everything that's been said. I mean, I think all of us can agree here that we're not fans of President Trump, but I think he's exactly the president that we deserve right now. I go back to the H.L. Mencken quote: democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. I think that Republicans should enjoy these 4 years of Trump, because after these 4 years of Trump, we might get 8 years of President AOC.
And not just President AOC untethered by by any constraint. Going after Catholic charities and auditing the taxes of her enemies. And I mean, I said this to so many Biden's. Actually, this is from something that the historian Tom Bersino said, and I know I've quoted it before, which is, you must love Trump because this is how you get more Trump.
Yeah. And
when Biden or would do stuff, you just say like, oh my God, I can't believe that you're doing this. because if Trump wins the next election, what do you think he's going to do with this precedent? Like,
Well,
and you're supporting it?
and Angela and Professor, I have lots of fears that I try not to let dominate my generally positive, optimistic personality. But one of my fears is that if a Democrat takes over as president, they're going to have to fire 50,000 federal government employees. And all the Democrats will cheer because they were Trump loyalist employees and they got rid of them. And then all the Republicans will say, you can't fire 50,000 employees. And the new Democratic president will prohibit all those law firms that settled with Trump from doing any business with the federal government. And all the Democrats will cheer and all the conservatives will say that's a horrible injustice. We'll just flip side. We'll just completely flip. And then I'll be looking at everybody going, why are we doing this? How is this good?
Well, just to root it in history again, one of the things that is the spoil system that came into practice under Andrew Jackson was one of the foundational beliefs of the Democratic Party. And it seems almost absurd to us today that this was the actual argument, but this was the actual argument, that what government does is so plain and so simple that any average person can do it. And so the president should be able to have anyone who's loyal to him serve in any office. And that was a foundational belief of the Democratic Party. And they had a really hard time even wanting to reform it. But between 1860 and 1932, you have 72 years of Republican administrations with only 2 exceptions. And that means that in the American South, and this is a really understood and underappreciated time in American history, that almost every white Republican in the South had been driven out of the party. And so that means that Black people within the Republican Party were in charge of all the political appointments in the American South and much of the North, and they were sort of given high positions of authority within the party to choose who would get these plum jobs. And you ended up with this alliance of progressives who wanted to get rid of the spoil system because of their belief and expertise, and racists and progressive racists who came together with people who actually wanted good government in order to back civil service reform. And it's like, where we get civil service reform is motivated by racism, racist progressives, and people who want good government. And the people who fought against it so hard were like Democrats, who were like, this is part of who we are, right? This is part of why we created the Democratic Party. And it's all of that stuff is really underappreciated from the late 19th century.
That is fascinating to have that bit of history for us to contemplate on what weird bedfellows are made in politics.
Yeah.
Angela, would you accept this label? And we don't like labels on our conversation. This is our 116th episode, and we've determined we don't like labels, but I'm going to try it with you anyway. Would you accept the label that you are a thoughtful, educated, wise liberal?
Yeah. And
And
I'll just say this: if we're looking at what's after Trump, if what follows Trump is me and my daughters being able to have bodily autonomy, I'll take it, because we have sacrificed a lot more than just character, integrity, and in truth with the election of Trump. We as women, which is half of the population, have lost fundamental rights. And so when we talk about the simple role of government, and one of those being to protect, freedoms, rights, and liberties, that has not happened. And we're losing due process, which I do agree with Professor Tootle about the development of our legal system, and that's falling, being just deconstructed also. So,
cool.
Yes, I'm your liberal on the on the conversation.
A little liberal. You're really liberal.
I don't like I don't like generalizations, and I voted for Republicans. I voted for Republicans that I feel like have integrity and character above Democrats that I felt like would, support my values. And I think most of us most of us feel that way. So we're not so rooted that we don't, there's, good characters and bad characters on both sides.
Yeah, and I don't need to go through what Professor Tootle's opinion of labels are because he hates them all. But I do think you would add value to other certain shows coming up in the future. Like on abortion. In Colorado, that's 60% of voters guaranteed a constitutional right, including eliminating parental consent. And now taxpayer-funded abortions are legal in Colorado and supported. So it's the opposite of what happened of overturned Roe versus Wade. It's much more solidified right in Colorado. So you're talking about states that have citizens have a different view on abortion. That's what you're concerned about, right? Because in Colorado,
I'm talking about the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
But it's more solidified in the Constitution now, is it not?
In Colorado.
Yeah,
but
right.
I want that to be a national.
But you don't care about your.
Because my kids aren't in Colorado. I have 2 daughters. They're not in Colorado.
Fair enough. And so do we. Yeah, I got you. Fair enough. All right, Professor, we should discuss immigration from the perspective that each side can't see the other side. We should talk about abortion that each side can't see the other side, because a lot of this fundamental truth just depends on which side you're on. And then you don't care about the truth. You care about getting your way. And it's not a critique, Angela, because you and I agree. And actually, so is the professor for the most part. But I think we should try to have citizens understand our society better and how they can be effective in a more useful way than the Facebook rants and I would argue mostly useless protests. I think we should be better citizens. And I know you have projects on that, and I applaud you for those. And I also appreciate your time. It's probably more interesting to have some Trumpian conservative debate, Professor Tootle, than you, because I think you guys would actually agree on a lot of things. But I think we should suss that out. Professor Tootle, you get the last word.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm always more comfortable discussing principles rather than issues. And I think it would be useful. And I've said many times, I would love to have a thoughtful Trump supporter on the show and just listen to them for an hour and a half.
Oh, God. You have to actually just listen for an hour and a half?
Well, I've had so many productive conversations with Trump supporters, and I mean goofballs, sign holding, hat wearing, goofballs. And if you'd be amazed what they will concede once you get them once they stop shouting.
Oh, I thought you wanted intellectual Trumpians, because that's who I was working on. I've got a couple that are willing to come on our show.
But I'm also interested, I'm interested in talking to anybody who's
all right.
Thoughtful.
Angela, don't sign up for that show because you'll have a heart attack, as I will. So don't listen to.
I won't.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay.
Well,
hey, you all, I appreciate it. Last bite, Professor. Anything else you want to say before we hang up?
Oh, I just say, don't be afraid to listen to people who disagree with you.
Come on. I've got a life to live. I don't want to be all upset about.
You don't have to listen to everybody who's a goofball, but I think we put out some quality content. People should be listening to us and how we manage these conversations.
All right. Professor, appreciate your time. Angela, thanks for signing up. Jeff, Jake, and other folks that signed in and out during the show. Have a great day.
See ya.